So continuing our favorite water cooling cases series, today we're going to talk about an old school case, and that's going to be the Corsair 900D. So let's get started. Alright guys, so in my series of favorite water cooling cases, I've been talking about all the different water cooling cases that I've done before that I really like, different points. Today we're going to talk about a more old school case, and that's going to be the Corsair 900D. Now we're going to talk about it in terms of aesthetics, performance, and then third is going to be different build notes and interesting things about the case that I found out as I was building in it. So first, let's tackle the aesthetics. Now, the Corsair 900D is a case that came out a few years ago. Basically, in my opinion, this is one of the most iconic water cooling cases that you can get, period. What makes it so? Well, first, let's talk about the massive amount of room that you have. In fact, when I built in this case, there's so much radiator space that it's ridiculous. And we're going to talk about that in the performance section. But in terms of the aesthetics, you just have a huge open panel where you can really do whatever you want in terms of water cooling. Not only do you have space from left to right, but from top to bottom, it's almost like it's an endless pit of stuff that you can fit in there in the basement of the case. And the most iconic thing about this case, that's going to be the 4 fans on the bottom. Now, these are going to be 120 millimeter fans. You can put a 480 millimeter radiator here. In fact, one of my favorite cases that I also did a video on, the Case Labs SMA8, you also have these 4 fans on the bottom, as well as the Leon Lee V3000, which I have a video on that coming up as well. These are all very similar in their designs, but of course here in the Corsair 900D, it looks absolutely epic as it does in those other cases. It's one of my favorite features of cases like this. There's nothing like having your water-cooled system on top and seeing your 4 fans on the bottom, and with the advent of really awesome RGB fans, this can become even more spectacular in terms of aesthetics. Back when this case was newer, basically the flashier fans that you had were going to be something like the Corsair fans that had the colored ring on it, but as the years went by, we have more and more RGB fans now. Even a few years ago, we started getting Corsair RGB fans, and these of course look absolutely epic in this case. In terms of the aesthetics, it does have a clear panel. Now, since this case is a little bit older, it's before the tempered glass craze sort of set in, so this is going to be an acrylic panel. You can do tempered glass in it, but of course you would have to do a very custom job, and that's another thing about the aesthetics of this case. There are so many third-party companies that make different modification elements for this case. It really has such a wide gamut of different possibilities if you want to modify this case. You can get different panels to mount reservoirs. You can get different panels for literally everything. In fact, if you've ever seen a lot of the old school water cooling builds, even from like Jay's 2 Cents before he did Skunkworks and Singularity Computers, so many of these builds were done in the Corsair 900D because that was just a big boy back in the day. And even recently, Corsair updated this case with the Corsair 1000D, but in my opinion, this new case, as massive and cool as it is in its own right, doesn't come close to that iconic status that the 900D has, just because of the design with those fans on the bottom. Everything was so nicely laid out. And of course, the only kind of funny point aesthetically here, you have all those hard drive bays, which I guess you can mod and take out if you really wanted, but that's definitely one of the things that kind of shows the age of the case, because back then people used to use larger hard drives. Now we have M.2 hard drives, even smaller SSD hard drives, so you don't necessarily need all that space, and case design has changed considerably, but even considering that, this still is an awesome case aesthetically. Now, in terms of performance, and when we talk about performance in water cooling cases, we're really talking about radiator space and airflow. This actually, I think, was one of the best cases that I've ever built in. Now, it's probably second only to the Case Labs SMA8, because even with maintaining those hard drive caddies, I was able to fit 480 millimeter really thick EK performance radiators on the top and on the bottom. Not only that, I still had enough room to do push-pull on the top, which with some nice static pressure fans gave me absolutely unbelievable performance. At the time, I had SLI 1080 Ti's hooked up to this, and the cards under load would normally be under 40 Celsius. They'd be like 37 to 39 C, which is really pretty ridiculous. Like a really good temperature for a water cooling case and your GPU, let's say it's a smaller case. If you're in the mid 40s, it's usually pretty acceptable. It's pretty good. Now, to be in the 30s is really, really exceptional. Being able to fit a thick 480 millimeter radiator on the top and on the bottom. That's why this case is so good for water cooling. The amount of room that you have is incredible, and none of that room really affects your motherboard or your GPUs. In fact, you could even do a dual reservoir and pump in this case if you wanted to. It has more than enough room to do that while still looking aesthetically pretty awesome. Now, a couple of little downsides, and we're going to talk about this now in our third category of these, miscellaneous notes. Even when the case is completely empty because of its solid construction, it really feels extremely heavy. Now, throw some water cooling gear on here, like multiple radiators and multiple pumps and reservoirs, and you'll see that this case becomes really unmanageable to move by yourself. You really need two people if you want to move it from one end to the other. You can try by yourself, but you may have a chance of dropping it or anything like that. And if you do have to get some air out of the system, a lot of times that require you moving the system to the side. Be very careful because this case is extremely heavy. That's one of the little funny things about it. And now, while I consider the build quality of this case to be pretty good, it's definitely not the best by any stretch of the imagination. For example, if you're not careful, you can very easily bend some of these panels, and it may be a little bit harder to close the front or the back. So the build quality, while of course it's not bad at all, it's definitely not the best built case that I've ever had. It's not like the Case Labs SMA8. You just have to be careful not to bend panels or anything like that if the case moves, because it may flex a little bit, especially if you have things out of the case. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But overall, building in this case is absolutely awesome. And if you happen to need a hard drive space, you have it in spades here. You have more than necessary. You have various options for mounting even 5.25 inch drives everywhere. So it is going to be an extensively flexible system where you could really build whatever water cooling gear that you want. So to summarize, this is a spectacularly large case that are going to give you some of the most iconic aesthetics that you can with water cooling. Aside from having an awesome clear panel that you get to see everything in a large format, you have those 4 big fans on the bottom, and then in terms of performance, you can fit a ridiculous amount of radiators on the top and on the bottom. You could really have the thickest radiators running, and it's really, really good for performance because the airflow is very good in such a large case. It's unimpeded at the bottom. On the top, it's really good. And this case, if you really wanted to modify it, you could remove those hard drive bays and do a million different things. So this case, although it's a little bit older now and it is outdated in some areas, it remains one of my most favorite and iconic water cooling cases. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Remember to subscribe if you like my content, smash that like button, leave a comment below, and I'll see you guys on the next video.